Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to Copper Jacket TV. So today we've got some huge news. The Supreme Court has decided to take up a major Second Amendment case. This case could change the ATF's rulemaking forever. So let's talk about what's going on. Now, before we get started, I want to talk about today's sponsor, which is Delete Me, an amazing service that allows you to get your online privacy back. Believe it or not, there are data brokerage sites out there whose sole mission is to gather and sell your personal data. So what is Delete Me and what do they do? Delete Me is a company dedicated to protecting your privacy. Based on the information you provide to Delete Me, they will scour the internet and data brokerage sites for your personal information. Once they find your exposed personal data, they remove it. Now, I've had my Delete Me account since December, and already they've removed my personal identifying information from 42 sites. That's 42 sites no longer able to sell my info. One of the best features of Delete Me is the user dashboard that gives you all the information that you could possibly want. Who has your data, the type of data, and the status of its removal by Delete Me. So if your online data privacy is important to you, join Delete Me. Use the link down below to save 20% or use the discount code COPPERJACKET. Okay, so let's go and talk about what's going on here because this is huge news. Earlier today, the Supreme Court decided to grant cert, which means they're going to hear the case of Vanderstok v. Garland, which is an FBC case that challenges the ATF's final rule on frames or receivers. Now, this is huge for multiple reasons. The first thing I should mention, however, is that this case was brought before the Supreme Court by Merrick Garland himself. This isn't a case that we lost in the lower courts and it had to be brought up to the Supreme Court in order for us to get a win. This is actually something that was brought to the Supreme Court by the DOJ. Now, this case, like I said before, is huge for multiple reasons. One, obviously, it challenges that final rule on frames or receivers, right? What is that definition? What's considered a frame? What's considered a receiver? What's considered readily convertible or readily modified, right? So there's a lot of things that are being considered in this case, but the big things are the ATF's ability to make rules like this and basically change things and create definitions out of existing law. How they go about creating these new laws is what's really at stake. So the future ability for the ATF to create final rules like this is going to be in jeopardy because of this case. Now, just to give you a quick example of how big this case could actually be, keep in mind that Bruin was nothing more than a case about carry out of the state of New York. That carry case out of the state of New York ended up changing the Second Amendment landscape across this entire country forever. That's how big this is. Now, the big thing to pay attention to here are going to be the questions presented to the Supreme Court. So these are, again, the questions that the Supreme Court must answer in this case. Now, there's two questions that we have here. One is whether a parts kit that is designed or may readily be completed, assembled, restored, or otherwise converted to expel a projectile by the action of an explosive is a firearm regulated by the Act. Now, the Act that they're talking about is going to be the GCA, or the Gun Control Act of 1968. So they're asking the Supreme Court to clarify whether or not that's considered a firearm. Number two, whether a partially complete, disassembled, or non-functional frame or receiver that is designed or maybe readily completed, assembled, restored, or otherwise converted to function as a frame or receiver is a frame or receiver regulated by the Act. So basically what they're asking the Supreme Court here is whether or not the GCA says what the final rule actually is. So they're trying to get clarification from the Supreme Court. Now, one thing to consider here is that if we get a favorable outcome in this case, it would have a huge effect across this country, especially in states like mine, Nevada, which just recently banned that practice. As a matter of fact, our state Supreme Court recently upheld the ban, very similar to the ATF's own final rule. So again, that would have huge implications, but if we get a favorable outcome, it would obviously overturn that final rule, and it would have an effect on any existing final rules and any final rules that the ATF might be considering moving forward. So again, this case is going to be bigger than people give it credit for. Just like Bruin was bigger than the Kerry case, this thing could end up being massive. Now, if we don't get the win, it's going to be just as bad in the opposite effect. So it's going to be huge either way, but I predict, and again, this is just based on my opinion alone, I predict that we will get a win out of this. So this is one that we're going to have to watch really closely, because when we get that breaking news that the Supreme Court has come out with a decision in this one, it's going to be huge either way. So we're going to have to, again, we'll stay on top of it. But still, there needs to be oral arguments. The process needs to be started. It's going to be a little bit of time before we actually get a final decision on this. But it's still big news that they decided to take the case. The only thing that kind of bothers me about this is that the Supreme Court will take a case if it's brought up, by the DOJ. So obviously Merrick Garland brings this up. He, requests cert from the Supreme Court, and they decide to take it. But what about the other cases that weren't brought before them by the Department of Justice that also involve similar things, right? We have plenty of cases right now out of Illinois, other states, and Massachusetts that are sitting before the Supreme Court that we want granted cert as well. And they shouldn't be denied cert just simply because they weren't brought before them by the government. So that's like my only problem is, what about these other cases? There's still a chance that they may take one. I think it's a good chance that they'll take another one. But as for right now, this is the one that was granted first. And that's kind of annoying that they'll, accept the government's case first. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of vent on that. So that's what's going on. I think it's great to see that they at least took one more 2A case. Hopefully we can put this one to bed soon. I want to thank you all very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Please like, subscribe. You guys have a great day.